The secret beneath the candlelight. What would you do if everyone believed you were a failure, but you secretly held the power to destroy the person they worshipped? The candles flickered across our Denver dining room table, casting shadows that seemed to dance with the tension hanging in the air. At 19, I had grown accustomed to these monthly family dinners where I played the role of the disappointing daughter, while my 23-year-old sister Stephanie basked in our father Robert's endless praise. The routine was always the same. Robert would raise his wine glass, toast Stephanie's latest achievement, and then glance at me with that familiar mixture of disappointment and concern. Tonight felt different, though. Maybe it was the way Stephanie's designer dress seemed to shimmer a little too desperately under the chandelier light, or how her laugh sounded just a touch too forced when Robert announced her promotion to regional sales director. I had been supporting her lifestyle for 2 years now, transferring $5,000 every month to keep up her facade of success. The irony wasn't lost on me that while she sat there accepting congratulations for her independence and business acumen, she couldn't afford her rent without my help. "Jessica," Robert said, turning his attention to me with that practiced patience he reserved for discussing my failures, "maybe you should consider following Stephanie's example. This computer hobby of yours isn't sustainable. At your age, Stephanie was already climbing the corporate ladder." I looked down at my simple jeans and sweater, then across at Stephanie's outfit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The Cartier watch on her wrist caught the light as she cut her steak with exaggerated elegance. Everything about her screamed success, from her perfectly styled hair to her confident posture. If only Robert knew the truth. The words had been building inside me for months, maybe even years. Every time I sat through these dinners, every time I listened to Robert praise Stephanie's accomplishments while dismissing my work as juvenile, every time I transferred money to maintain her lie, the pressure grew stronger. Tonight, something inside me finally snapped. I set my knife and fork down with more force than intended. The sharp clink against the china plate cut through Robert's monologue about Stephanie's leadership qualities, causing both of them to look at me in surprise. The silence that followed felt electric, charged with all the unspoken truths I had been carrying. "If Stephanie is so successful and independent," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "I'm sure she won't need the $5,000 I've been transferring to her account every month for the past 2 years. The transformation on Stephanie's face was immediate and devastating. Her confident smile froze, then crumbled entirely. The color drained from her cheeks so quickly that I almost felt sorry for her. Robert's wineglass stopped halfway to his lips, his eyes narrowing as he processed what I had just revealed. "Jessica, what are you talking about?" Robert's voice carried a dangerous edge that I had rarely heard directed at anyone but me. Stephanie was making small, frantic gestures with her hands, her eyes pleading with me to stop. But I was done protecting her lies. I was done being the family disappointment while she lived off my success. $120,000, Dad. That's how much I've given Stephanie over the past 2 years. Her rent, her car payments, her credit cards, her shopping trips, all of it funded by my supposedly worthless computer work. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert set his wineglass down so carefully that I could hear the slight tremor in his hands. His face had gone very pale, and when he looked at Stephanie, there was something broken in his expression. "Stephanie," he said quietly, "is this true?" My sister's composure completely shattered. Tears started streaming down her face, smearing her carefully applied makeup. Her hands shook as she tried to wipe them away, leaving dark streaks across her cheeks. "I can explain," she whispered, but her voice cracked on every word. "It was supposed to be temporary. I never meant for it to go on this long. I just couldn't disappoint you, Dad. You were so proud of me, and I couldn't bear to tell you that I was struggling." Robert's expression shifted from confusion to devastation. I could see him remembering every proud moment he had shared about Stephanie with friends, colleagues, neighbors. Every toast he had made to her success, every comparison he had drawn between his daughters, every lecture he had given me about following her example. "What exactly is your real job?" Robert asked, his voice barely audible. Stephanie's sobs grew louder. "I manage 3 people at the department store. That's it. I'm not a regional director. I don't make 6 figures. I don't even make enough to cover my basic expenses." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. With a few quick taps, I canceled the automatic monthly transfer that had been draining my account for 24 months. The confirmation screen glowed in the dim candlelight as I turned it toward Stephanie. "There," I said calmly. "No more subsidizing your lies." Robert pushed back from the table and stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. He looked at both of us as if seeing us for the first time, his face a mixture of betrayal and confusion. Without another word, he walked out of the dining room, leaving Stephanie sobbing at the table and me sitting in the strange calm that follows a storm. I finished my dinner while Stephanie cried. The food had grown cold, but I ate every bite methodically, savoring not just the meal, but the weight that had lifted from my shoulders. For 2 years, I had carried the burden of her deception, watching her accept praise that belonged to me, listening to lectures about my lack of ambition while secretly funding her lifestyle. The next morning brought the consequences I had been expecting. Stephanie appeared at my bedroom door, her face swollen from crying, still wearing yesterday's clothes. She looked desperate and small, nothing like the confident woman who had dominated last night's dinner conversation. "Jessica, please," she begged, dropping to her knees beside my bed. "I know what I did was wrong, but I need that money. My rent is due next week, my car payment, my credit cards. Without your help, I'll lose everything." I sat up in bed and looked down at her. This was the sister who had stood by silently while Robert criticized my choices for years. The sister who had accepted thousands of dollars from me while allowing me to be treated as the family failure. The sister who had built her entire reputation on a lie that I was funding. "You should have thought about that before you spent 2 years lying to everyone, including yourself," I replied. "I'm done enabling your deception." Stephanie's pleas grew more desperate, but I remained unmoved. She had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. I watched her leave my room, knowing that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse entirely. Within a month, the full extent of Stephanie's financial recklessness became apparent. Without my monthly transfers, she couldn't maintain any of her expenses. She lost her luxury apartment and had to sell most of her designer clothes and accessories to pay her credit card debts. The car she could no longer afford was repossessed, forcing her to take public transportation to her retail job where she worked extra shifts just to cover basic living expenses. Her social media presence, which had been carefully curated to showcase her supposedly successful lifestyle, became a liability when former colleagues began questioning her claims about promotions and bonuses. One particularly damaging comment from a coworker asking about her $15,000 quarterly bonus went viral within her network, exposing years of fabricated achievements. Meanwhile, Robert began asking me questions about my business with genuine curiosity for the first time. Mountain Peak Essentials, my outdoor equipment e-commerce company, had grown far beyond what anyone in my family realized. What had started as a small online venture in my bedroom had evolved into a $1 million enterprise with international shipping and partnerships with major outdoor gear manufacturers. I had always been secretive about my success, partly because I enjoyed the irony of being underestimated, and partly because I knew revealing the truth would change everything. But as Robert sat in my home office, watching me field calls from suppliers and review inventory reports, I could see his perspective shifting in real time. "Jessica," he said after I finished a conference call with our European distributors, "how long has your business been this successful?" I pulled up my financial reports on my laptop screen. Last year we did $1.2 million in revenue with about $600,000 in profit. This year we're on track to double that. Robert stared at the numbers, his mouth slightly open. I could see him calculating not just the financial success, but the years of dismissive comments he had made about my work. The lectures about responsibility and ambition that he had delivered while I was quietly building an empire from my childhood bedroom. "I owe you an enormous apology," he said finally. "I've been completely wrong about everything." The apology felt good, but it was the change in Robert's behavior that truly mattered. He began referring business contacts to me, asking for my advice on investments, and most importantly, speaking about me with the same pride he had once reserved for Stephanie's fabricated achievements. When his sister Jennifer called to congratulate me after Robert shared the news of my success, she laughed loudly over the phone. "I tried to tell your father for years that you were special," she said. But he was so blinded by Stephanie's performances that he couldn't see what was right in front of him. 6 months after that fateful dinner, my business had expanded into European markets, and I was featured in several business magazines as one of the country's most promising young entrepreneurs. The $5,000 I had once sent to Stephanie every month was now being reinvested into international expansion, generating returns that exceeded my wildest projections. Stephanie's fall from grace had been complete and public. Her social media accounts, once showcasing her glamorous lifestyle, had been deleted after the embarrassing revelations about her lies. She was living in a small studio apartment across town, working double shifts at the department store, and slowly paying down the massive debt she had accumulated during her years of false prosperity. The most telling moment came when Robert hosted another family dinner, this time to celebrate my company's expansion into Asian markets. As I sat at the same dining room table where the confrontation had begun, I realized how completely our positions had reversed. Robert spoke about my achievements with genuine pride and understanding, asking intelligent questions about market penetration and supply chain logistics. Stephanie, when she finally worked up the courage to attend family gatherings again, was quiet and subdued. The expensive clothes and confident demeanor had been replaced by simple outfits and a hesitant manner that suggested she was still processing the full extent of her downfall. "I never meant for things to go so far," she said to me privately after one dinner. "I just wanted Dad to be proud of me, and once I started lying, it became impossible to stop." Looking at her, I felt something I hadn't expected, not satisfaction or revenge, but a strange kind of pity. She had traded years of authentic relationship with our father for a facade that ultimately benefited no one. While I had been building something real, she had been constructing an elaborate fiction that required constant maintenance and eventually consumed everything genuine about her life. As my business continued to grow, I moved into a downtown office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Rocky Mountains. Standing there one evening, reviewing contracts for our newest product line, I reflected on the journey from that candlelit dinner table to this moment. The confrontation had been necessary, painful, and ultimately liberating for everyone involved. Robert had learned to value substance over appearances, though it cost him his relationship with the daughter he thought he knew. Stephanie had been forced to confront the consequences of years of deception, a harsh but necessary lesson about the price of living beyond one's means and one's truth. And I had discovered that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't anger or revenge, but simply the courage to speak the truth. The candles from that night had long since burned out, but their light had illuminated something much more valuable: the realization that authentic success requires no audience, needs no validation, and speaks for itself when the moment is right. Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones who hold all the cards, and sometimes the most devastating revelations come not from enemies, but from the people who love you enough to finally stop enabling your lies. Standing in my office that evening, watching the sun set behind the mountains that had inspired my company's name, I smiled at the memory of that pivotal moment. The truth, I had learned, really is the most powerful weapon of all.